off. Hello and welcome to DigiTalks at UX Australia 2021. My name is Alex Kenning and I am the Managing Director of Aquent in Australia. I'll begin today's session with an acknowledgement of country. Aquent acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognises the continuing connection to lands, waters and communities. We pay our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to elders both past and present. Now, for those of you who are not aware who Aquent are and what we do, we are a global workforce solutions company specializing in digital marketing, creative and development. We help organizations find, grow and support their most valuable resource, which is people. Today's DigiTalks is why accessibility and inclusive design matters. Over the next 45 minutes, you'll learn why accessibility and user experience design are inextricably tied together and the increasingly important role we all have to play in this process. Let me introduce today's presenters. First up, we have Andrew Miller. Andrew, I think you are there. And yeah, there he is. Thank you, Andrew. And Andrew is beaming in live all the way from Boston in the US. Andrew is the program director of the award-winning online design education platform, the Aquent Gymnasium. And alongside Andrew, we have Jeremy Osborne. Thank you, Jeremy. Good to see you. And Jeremy is also based and is also beaming live from Boston in the US of A. As a design educator, he is currently the Director of Learning at Aquent Gymnasium, where he has produced numerous online courses for web and UX designers. We're going to have a 45-minute presentation with 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A tab. Please enter your questions into there and I will get to as many as I can after the presentation. But that is all from me for now. So Andrew and Jeremy, over to you guys.
Thanks for the introduction, Alex. And thanks so much for having us here today. I'm Andrew, and I wanted to just give a quick rundown of what we think we're going to be covering. So we're going to talk about how to understand the connection between usability and accessibility, how to understand the spectrum of human ability, how to apply the web accessibility guidelines to your UX work, and how to evangelize accessibility further in your organization. And I do want to just mention that there's a button that says live transcript down below, and you can turn on the live captioning. And so you can see the words that we're speaking. But I think that Jeremy wanted to get started actually with a story about a fan.
That is correct, Andrew. I would like to start this presentation with a short parable, if you will, about how it took me 20 minutes to turn on a new fan. And before I start this, I do want to say, yes, this presentation is about UX design and digital products. Having said that, about a week ago, I bought this wonderful 20-inch floor fan to air out my basement. And I brought it back home and I wanted to plug it in, set it up, and be done with it. I opened up the box and there was a set of instructions. And having been a UX designer off and on and an educator and a designer, I kind of chuckled because why do you need some operating instructions for a fan? As it turns out, the joke was on me because I did need these instructions. And it turns out these instructions were a little more complicated than I thought. So let me just walk through this. And again, I promise there's a purpose to this. So at the beginning, I had to remove these two screws. And believe me when I tell you that this instruction was a lot easier said than done, so that the screws themselves were kind of tied right in. What was it you said, Andrew? They were kind of machine driven in. Yeah, so
I think they used something much stronger than human beings.
Yes, exactly. Some sort of device with high torque. So it took me longer than it really should have to remove this screw. And then I had, of course, do it on the other arm as well. And then next step, actually these two steps, were to slide these U-shaped tube bases into the fan support tube with the smaller end, figure 1A in diagram and figure 1B and so forth. And again, this was also easier said than done. And you can tell from the scratch marks here on the bottom that the fit between these two tubes was incredibly tight. And of course, I had to do it because you see those two holes. I had to then put the screw that I had taken out of both back into the fan and secure with screws. This was not easy at all. In fact, it was incredibly frustrating for a number of reasons. And I'm sure you've all experienced this, whether it be assembling furniture and any number of things. And as a designer or just a human being, this just kept on repeating itself in my brain. Why? Why did they do this? Why am I going through this? Why is it taking me 20 minutes to do this? Why could they not have just shipped the entire fan as an entire unit and then be done with it? So there's a larger point here, which is there was a real mismatch between what I expected, which was to put the fan in, to take out the fan, plug it in, turn it on, and be done with it, and the reality, which was 20 minutes. And that frustration kept building and building and building. And it was not fun. And again, as UX designers, perhaps you can see where this is going. The creator of this, so whoever it was, the product designer, the head of the fan company, probably had all sorts of reasons why they did this, why they shipped this. Perhaps it was saving costs. Perhaps the engineer said, no, you have to do it this way. Who knows what? In the end, I kept saying, why? Why doing this? And Andrew and I were talking about this. We actually came up with a list of reasons, and we ended up throwing them out of this presentation because we realized it didn't actually matter. It didn't matter what the reasons were for this. The end result was it was incredibly frustrating. So, user experience. When it comes to digital products, whether it be or real products, no matter what, everything matters. And I'm sure, again, as UX designers, you have some sense of this. There are things that are out of your control. There are things that are in your control. But in the end, all it comes down to is how the user feels when they're using your product. So that leads us to what are the frustrations that we experience when we're using digital products? And there's a whole list of them. I'm not going to get into the details of them, but just to make sure we're on the same page, there are things like slow performance, confusing navigation, having a hard time understanding or reading text. It can be too small, bad contrast, small click targets, trying to tap on things and they don't actually register, data getting lost, getting interrupted in the middle of doing something, standard conventions being ignored. So disabling the back button, that's a huge one. Don't do it, please. Getting distracted. And this is happening more and more on the web these days. I think you'll agree. It seems like every single web page we go to, there's always something clamoring for our attention, whether it be auto playing videos or animations. So these are some of the things. And of course, this is a little bit of overview just to make sure we're on the same page. UX design, how do we try to address this? Well, there's a whole set of things that at this point are fairly straightforward, or at least documented. There are boot camps for this. There are books for this. There are entire programs for this. This is what you do. You talk to users. How do you do that? Through interviews, surveys, focus groups, analytics. But then there's a larger question of the systems that you're working with. You plan, design, test interfaces. There's information architecture, there's research, there's benchmarking, there's testing. I don't need to tell you all this. I'm assuming that this is what you do and this is the life that you love, because in the end, we're trying to create systems, interfaces that users want to use, right? So how does accessibility tie into all this? So let's make sure we're on the same page. So accessibility, if we look at the definition, this is from the Mozilla developer network is quite simply the practice of making your websites usable by as many people as possible. All right, cool. That actually, I'm good with that. That sounds pretty good. There is a more strict set of guidelines, and we'll be discussing some of these things later on. So the W3C is the World Wide Web Consortium, and they have a list of guidelines that define what accessibility means. Again, we'll be covering some of this later. Here's a quick overview. So accessibility means your content needs to be perceivable. Information and components must be displayed in such a way that users can see them or perceive them. Operable. All elements must be dynamically functional to allow users to interact with them. Number 3, understandable. Information and navigation should make sense to the user. And last but not least is robust. So content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted by a wide variety of user agents, including assistive technologies. Very important. So these are some of the high-level precepts or concepts that accessibility is defined as in these W3C guidelines. None of this, by the way, is radically new. If we go back to the beginnings of the web, so again, depending on how you define it, 1994, 95, but in 1997, Tim Berners-Lee, who we must thank over and over again for gifting the world the World Wide Web, had this quote: "The power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect." Again, that was in 1997. In fact, there was earlier precedent. So if you're in UX design and you don't know the name Jakob Nielsen, then you probably should get on that. But in 1994, Jakob Nielsen published a list of these 10 usability heuristics for user interface design. These are principles for making your, at that point, websites, because we didn't have apps, work well and have usability guidelines. There's a link down at the bottom, but there's also a run through of these. Visibility of system status, matching between the system and the real world, user control and freedom. So again, allowing the user to feel like they can control the site they're on and exiting and so forth. Consistency and standards, error prevention, recognition, flexibility, minimalist design. And we want you to kind of try to keep in mind some of these words highlighted in orange. So visibility, user control, consistency, flexibility, minimalist. They sound very vague, but at the same time, they have some very direct connections to the way we design our products. So the point of all this is, and what we really want you to start thinking about is, these are great. These are the principles of UX design. These are the principles of making products that resonate with our users. But the real question is, and the one that we really would like to emphasize in this presentation, is, are you thinking about who your users are really? Who are they? And are you really designing for them? So we're going to be providing this little roadmap along the way that we introduced at the beginning. We just covered how to understand the connection between usability and accessibility. And now Andrew's going to talk a little bit, actually, I'm going to talk a little bit about the spectrum of human ability. Did I get that right, Andrew? Yes.
Yep. But I think you wanted to talk about the fan some more.
Oh, that's right. You know what? I did want to talk. I can't let go of the fan. It just bothered me so much. So back to the fan. Yeah. So here's the thing. It took me 20 minutes, but I'm fortunate enough that I did not have, at the time, a visual disability. Although if I took out my contacts right now, I would really have a hard time with the rest of this presentation. So in many ways, I actually do have a visual disability. Motor coordination difficulties, or if English wasn't my first language, or if I had just sprained my wrist. All of those things would have made the job of putting that fan together infinitely more difficult, if not impossible. And in other words, I could see myself returning that fan to the store. By the way, just in case anyone is looking at those details, there was absolutely no instructions on the outside of that box that said assembly required. So even if I was looking for it, it was not there. So we're now going to be talking a little bit about this continuum. And this is a quote from a designer who, in fact, unfortunately passed away 2014, I believe, named Cindy Lee. But she created this presentation and came up with this wonderfully concise sentence that we are all just temporarily abled. And I love this quote so much because it's extremely true, folks. Think about it. If you're fortunate enough right now to feel like you have the full continuum of your senses, at some point you will not. That's just a fact of life. And this is from the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit, which we'll be talking a little bit more about later. And this is this continuum. Technically, it's called the persona spectrum. Is that correct, Andrew? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that's what they call it. It's just a bit confusing because we think of personas as different, but anyway, yeah. Continuum.
Be careful not to it's tie this in with the UX design version of or UX version of personas. But in some ways, there's connections here. But if we look at this top row, there are three categories: permanent, temporary, and situational disabilities. And if we look at this first one, there's a whole range of these. These are just some of them. We couldn't actually fit all of these on the slide. But you can see that there are three levels of how one might be disabled. And we're going to be looking at a definition of these later, but just keep in mind that these range from different, these have different senses: so touch, sight, hearing, and I'm sorry, I'm missing. That's why we need a bigger slide. So let's just look at what this means. So if you have a permanent loss of limb, well, that is a permanent disability. You have a temporary loss of limb, such as spraining your arm or wrist. At some point, that will come back, and now you're up and running. And then the third one is situational loss of limb. And I think if all of us who have had kids, or if you've ever had to hold a kid and do something, that is a situational disability. You must make do with what you have. So this is a very interesting way to begin thinking of how to design and how to think of your users. And I think one of the things that we'd like to get across is that this range is something that a lot of us overlook. And that's not even it. There's more. So we also have cognitive challenges. So people with conditions that affect their ability to process, understand, and communicate information. These include items such as understanding complex logic, understanding abstract concepts, understanding language usage. So, for example, this third one, the understanding language usage, it could be as simple as those fan instructions. If I didn't read English and or speak English, I was looking at those instructions, I would have a very hard time. I had a hard time, and I understand English. There are also permanent, temporary, and situational categories for these cognitive ranges as well. Permanent might be something like dyslexia. Temporary might be a concussion or migraine that makes it difficult to concentrate or focus. And situational might be lack of sleep or stress. So these are also cognitive disabilities. We want to do a quick plug for our friends over at A Book Apart, and specifically this book, Design for Real Life. This is a fantastic book if you have not picked it up, highly recommend reading it. There is a quote from this, and basically to summarize this is a summary of this book. You can't always predict who will use your products or what emotional state they'll be in when they do. But by identifying stress cases and designing with compassion, you'll create experiences that support more of your users more of the time. So what Sarah and Eric have done in that book is essentially expand the definition of what you need to be thinking about as you begin designing digital products. Andrew, why don't you talk about this one a little bit, because you're the one who found this, and this is a fantastic site.
Yeah, Empathy Prompt was a fantastic discovery. So you can go to the site and just go to empathyprompts.net, and it will automatically direct you to one of these prompts. And it makes a suggestion for you to do something, and you get a sense of then what it might be like to experience any number of the varying abilities or challenges that folks have. And so in this case, the suggestion is to wake up at 2:45 a.m. and immediately try and book a flight for that vacation you've been dreaming about. And of course, you're not going to necessarily be at the top of your game at that point. And so, not to discount what a more permanent cognitive challenge might be like for that person, it's about helping you develop your empathy a bit further. And so, to go back to that hot and sweaty night when Jeremy was trying to struggle with the fan and making sense of the instructions, and ordinarily in central air conditioning with a cold drink in his hand and not struggling to get this fan assembled, he might have been able to understand the instructions with a little more patience. But all of these things were conspiring against him to make sense of it. And so that's kind of the point. Like, the circumstance can really change things, as can any sort of pre-existing situation.
And the reason this site is fantastic, highly recommend you go to it, is essentially we'll go through a random set of different prompts, which kind of shake you out of your current way of thinking. And they also provide links to help support that as well. Andrew, why don't you continue with this one too? Because again, this is another great quote that you found about the inclusive toolkit, which we had mentioned earlier. And I'll let you run with this one as well.
Yeah, so generally, I think reading things on slides is kind of tough and for the audience, but this happens to be, I think, one of the most articulate and beautiful insights to help you understand not only this really interesting sort of range of abilities, but also to understand that, generally we say ignore the outliers, only focus on the middle of the bell curve or whatever. And the truth is that if you start to focus on the outliers, you're going to help people who haven't been helped up to this point necessarily. You're also going to make a better product for everyone. And so forgive me as I read this. I think it's beautiful though. Disability happens at the points of interaction between a person and society. Physical, cognitive, and social exclusion is the result of mismatched interactions. Definitely let that marinate, because I think it's pretty deep. As designers, it's our responsibility to know how our designs affect these interactions and create mismatches. And these points of exclusion help us generate new ideas and inclusive designs. They highlight opportunities to create solutions with utility and elegance for many people. The point being that if you design for accessibility, you make a better product for everybody.
And this idea of mismatching, again, to head one more time back to the fan, that mismatch of what I expected that experience to be, which is plugging in, turning on, getting cool, did not happen. And so this idea of trying to think, how could I be creating a mismatch? Where, as a designer, might it be my responsibility to try to close that gap? So we just talked about that spectrum of human ability. Now we're going to talk a little bit about getting right down into the nitty gritty of how to apply the web accessibility guidelines to your UX work?
So it occurs to me that a lot of accessibility conversations really focus on the front end. They talk about alt tags and alt tags and alt tags. And when you read about the lawsuits, the spectacular lawsuits where companies are being sued, you hear about if only they had put in alt tags. But the truth is that accessibility starts at the user experience design, with the user experience design and with the UX designer. And so if you're wondering what and where, like where do you do this? Because there's no place for the alt tags, right? So it starts with user research. It starts with your personas. It starts with the scenarios and user stories and user journeys and all those design artifacts. It's basically everything that user experience, the work stream, the workload tends to touch. And so regardless of the purview of you as a designer in your current state, on your team, if you have a team, in your organization, there are key opportunities for UX designers and researchers and analysts to do their part. And so the how, and you need to learn about the accessibility guidelines, and it's daunting because it's dry, and we'll get to that. But I think that the more you understand the value of what those guidelines present, the more you'll recognize that they give you superpowers. I think it's important also to consider users with different abilities and your personas and scenarios. And when you think about like your, goal-oriented senior manager in a finance department whose name is Margaret and she has a golden retriever and a Volvo, and she prefers to bet big on her investments. Like when you picture that person, when you find the stock art photograph of her looking at her salad and laughing, or whatever, and you've presented it to the client because you've understood the pain and suffering of their end users and how you can design this magnificent product to meet their needs. Like, is Margaret ever, suffering macular degeneration in her eyesight? Is she temporarily disabled in a sense that she broke her arm skiing because she's also a risk taker on the slopes? So quite often those people don't make it into our personas, and it's important to consider them. I don't know how you need to do it, but if you give it just a moment of thought, I think you'll figure it out. I think when you apply the guidelines to your designs and use the guidelines to inform your designs, you end up making the best choices. You make the most informed design choices for your users. So let's get to the guidelines, okay? Not the most inviting piece of reading material. I promise you, it's not on anyone's Goodreads shelf. But the thing is, it covers everything, like everything. It's the most comprehensive thing. But it covers everything. And what you need to understand from this list that I've brought out is these are your responsibilities. These are your obligations. Accessibility starts in the content and the structure of that content, the use of headers, navigation decisions, the interaction choices, the animations, don't give people seizures, don't confuse them, don't use ticker tape text, please never do that, right? The visual design, the color choices, all of that. And if you have a question about what it means to make a decision that is going to make your design an accessible design, the guideline document not only tells you like the recommendations, but also the rationale so that you can make a more critical choice. Right? You can follow these guidelines to the word and still produce something that is inaccessible. Right? But when you look at the guidelines, you'll see that they follow, there are a couple of themes that are woven through. It's about clarity, it's about consistency, it's about efficiency, it's about reliability, making things understandable, making things uncomplicated. And when you think about the people that these themes will impact, it's everybody. It's the smart person who's trying to assemble a fan. It's your aged grandparent who doesn't really feel comfortable with technology, but needs to do something. So often we think as designers that our job is to elate our users. You know what makes our users happy? When they can use the product and achieve their goal. So anyway, I think it's good. And so we like to say that when it comes to user experience, and especially given the story that Jeremy shared, everything matters. It doesn't matter why the decisions were made at the manufacturer's side. When it comes to your users' expectations and their experience, everything matters. And when it comes to accessibility, everyone matters. And this is the mindset that you need to adopt.
We should just toggle back and forth between these two slides for the rest of the presentation. This is one of the things that Andrew and I both agreed. Like this feels like the core of what we're trying to communicate. Okay, so 3 out of 4 done. We're going to be now talking a little bit, and part of what we're hoping at this point is everyone is shaking their heads and saying, cool, yes, okay, this is good. Or maybe some of you are like, yeah, I've known this, and how do I convince other people on my team, in my organization, and so forth to prioritize accessibility and inclusive design? So our hope here is that we can give you some tools, some logic, some arguments, some resources to help you do this. And there's a lot of different ways. We're going to try 3 of these and talk about them a little bit. So quickly, first one is lawsuits, lawsuits, lawsuits. And while we are broadcasting from the most litigious country on earth, and perhaps you are not as litigious as us over there, web accessibility lawsuits in the US are huge. They continue to grow. We'll be talking about that in a second. The second one's emphasizing the hidden markets of people with disabilities. It's our opinion, and there's a lot of research to back it up, that there are significant business opportunities being missed by almost any company. I guarantee you, if you look deep enough, companies are missing these opportunities because of these hidden markets, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then last but definitely not least is the business impact. So the hidden cost of poor accessibility. What does it cost your business in terms of just dollars and cents, resources, and so forth? Now, again, we want to emphasize here that we're framing this as ways for you to advocate for accessibility, and the chances are that the people you're going to be talking to, ones whose minds you may want to change or have them think a little bit deeper about something. Again, they may not be designers. I guarantee you, actually, they probably are not designers. And there's a lot. So the lawsuit piece, we did an earlier presentation, a different one, which we'll provide a link to later, also for the Australian audience, in which we used and located a number of cases in Australia that were very similar. But as you can see here, the number of federal lawsuits in the United States related to accessibility has exploded from 2013, the year 2013, from approximately 2,722 to roughly 11,000. And Andrew pointed out to me, what was it you said? The reason that 2020 is lower than 2019 is not because these aren't going up, but because...
Yeah, it was a little difficult to file paperwork in 2020, if you remember. There were some reasons that some offices were closed. But if you actually look at the data for each month, you'll see that around this time last year, the last few months of 2020 were indicating that this year is going to be an exponential increase again. All those people who were dying to file their complaints and their lawsuits couldn't get to literally couldn't file the paperwork. Things were jammed up. And so there's just a delay.
Yeah. And I do want to also mention, we have another presentation that we did that talked about some of the details of these for those of you who, again, feel like you're interested in doing some research on that piece. We have talked about that. The second one, just to kind of reinforce, just to go back for a second. So the hidden markets, emphasizing the hidden markets of people with disabilities. Why are significant business opportunities being missed every day? And Andrew has a lot to say about the purple pound, which, well, I'll just let you say it.
It's a distinctly UK thing. They call it the purple pound, and purple is the color that's been attributed to. I think they say that it's about disabled or differently abled. And so the purple pound is a concept that refers to the amount of money that businesses simply don't get to make when they avoid or exclude or ignore differently abled populations. And there are statistics throughout in many places for what the impact to business is. I think that this is a compelling story, and the value of this image, I think, is worth using this as opposed to just a set of numbers that we might find. But this is, as the UX designer who's trying to explain to the suits why they need to consider the importance of prioritizing accessibility. These are people who will pay huge amounts of money to optimize some minor percentage, a fractional percentage of closed sales in a shopping cart experience. They will fine-tune their analytics and end-to-end digital marketing platforms to the nth degree, but they're still not going to do the right thing. I mean, that's actually the real reason that they should be doing this, not even the numbers, but that they're going to ignore the opportunity of this huge market. Right? So we know that from the statistics that people who encounter challenges using a website because it's not an accessible website, or it's like a 60% or 70% bounce rate. They're not going to do business on that site. And if you know somebody who has been thwarted in their efforts to buy something online because a website isn't accessible, you're not going to do business with them either.
Yeah.
So it's in many ways, this estimate for how much money is not earned by businesses is a bit of an underestimate.
Yep. And to me, the one that, this piece here, the 75% of disabled people and their families have walked away from, and again, this is the UK business, walked away from UK business because of poor accessibility or customer service. And to me, that's an astounding figure. And if you just think of just the sheer loss of business, and that's what you want to avoid, and that's what you want to tell your bosses and supervisors and so forth, that they don't want to be the ones responsible for that number, right? Okay. So now this gets a little deeper. Did that stick? Is that still there? That's so funny. I see it on my.
You used the wrong marker. You used the permanent marker instead of the dry erase one. That's good.
Wow, it's amazing. So, so this is a graph that talks a little bit, and Andrew again can speak to some of this, but to make sense of it a little bit, this is the potential cost of accessibility complaints. And there's kind of these two figures here that we want to talk about. So the proactive fixed cost versus reactive fixed loss. I wonder if they try to make those rhyme. But Andrew, do you want to dig into this a little bit?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of different reasons why there are these hidden costs, the negative business impact for businesses that don't make their digital products accessible. And I think this comes from a presentation that was done by Dick Hugh, and we'll include the link in the deck. And I recommend watching it because the is a project manager and he makes a really good case. But he breaks it down and points out that when you control for the variables and you come up with a conservative estimate for how much it costs to solve a problem, if let's just say it's a missing alt tag, that the cost to make the fix before you have legal paperwork delivered, before there's an official complaint, and before you are actually sued for this, that the cost to repair something is say $100, and this is based on a blended rate and estimates of how many people would be involved in a particular fix. And under the circumstances where you have now had a formal complaint lodged against your company for sort of turning away users because your site is not accessible, that the cost, when you include the cost of your legal teams, the cost of the derailed business that you can't do while you're trying to fix this to avoid being sued, because the judgment will be, if you don't fix this in a certain amount of time, then it's going to cost you a whole lot more. And so while this is a bit of a hyperbolic example, the factor is about the same. You're looking at a significant increase in cost if you're fixing it when you're under the gun, as opposed to when you're doing it up front. And consider that you wouldn't even be fixing it if it wasn't broken in the beginning. And so if your process is built correctly, if you're employing good practices like design systems and pattern libraries, and if you're including differently abled people in your research and you're including them in your thinking about the personas and scenarios, and you're testing your designs, then you don't have these costs. And then you certainly don't have these costs when you're under the gun with legal pressure.
Yeah. And I would essentially...
Guys, just to jump in, we just got this a 5-minute warning from there.
Perfect. Thank you.
Cool.
We are on target. The summary to me of the slide is, do it right to begin with, right? Just do it right to begin with. Okay. So that's this piece. So we kind of completed our 4 sections here, and we'll take questions in a second. But before we do that, we do want to just mention a few resources that we think might be useful to continue this exploration of yours and to have it to dig a little deeper. So one of the things that we have, so again, Andrew and I run an online school, as we mentioned, called Gymnasium, and we do all sorts of stuff for Aequint, and that includes creating courses on some of the stuff that Andrew just mentioned. So Design Systems by Ethan Marcotte was the last series of courses that we did, and Ethan also did some on accessibility. But if you go check out Gymnasium and our accessibility collection, which is here, we've got all sorts of stuff. We've got, again, these courses, some tutorials for testing, articles, and links, and so forth. So you can go ahead and check that out.
Jeremy, did you remind everybody that it's free?
Oh,
completely free. It's free.
Sorry. Yeah. We should really mention that because yes.
Number one question that we get asked is how much the free courses cost.
Correct. I lost my presentation, but you'll be okay. So the second one is something that our folks here, Carolyn, Alex, and the rest of their friends at Aequint Australia, created this wonderful accessibility guide, how to get started with digital accessibility. And there are some steps there. Again, free seems to be the keyword here. And that's it. So now we're going to open it up for questions, and Alex is behind the scenes, I believe, as well as Carolyn, handling some of these. But just want to, before we do that, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Really appreciate it and hope that it's helped in some way.
Thank you both. Thank you both very much. Right, we do have some questions coming in, but please do enter any further questions you've got in the Q&A tab at the bottom. But I'll jump into some of the questions that we've already got. The first one is WCAG as an amazing source of guidelines for web. In the case of designing for apps, although there are a few accessibility guidelines on material design and human interface guidelines, they're not as detailed as WCAG. What would be your advice in making sure the apps we're designing and building meet accessibility standards?
lot there. Can you read that first part again? I just want to make sure that I'm...
Yeah, sure. So WCAG is an amazing source of guidelines for the web, but what about in the case of designing for apps? I think that's the crux.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. The principles are going to be the same at some level. Obviously, the world of apps, the world of web is different. I don't know. I mean, I think that if you start with the guidelines for web, you're going to be in pretty good shape. Is there an equivalent for mobile? And the answer in my experience is no, there is no direct correlation. And so you're either going to have to make some leaps of faith or use some analogies. I also have to admit that app development is not my strong suit. I am a web guy, always have been. So this may be, I don't know, Andrew, do you have a resource?
Yeah. So I think that I think a lot of the specifications for and recommendations for how to make a web application accessible, I think are translatable. I think most of the recommendations, like I said, include a rationale as well, and so I think it makes it easier to understand how to make the right choice. I think also that there's a real blurring of lines as to, and especially about the authoring platform, whether it's actually does it make a difference if it's a binary executable app or if it's a web app? And in many cases, the assets can be used and shared across binary apps and, with different frameworks. So I think that on iOS, certainly you can use VoiceOver and get the, just as you can do in a web browser. I think in Xcode, there's an accessibility inspector that gives you that gives you some insights as well, and certainly items like color contrast and typography choices and so forth are all as applicable because we're talking about the same sort of interaction space, the screen size, the size of assets, the size of type, the distance that people will be holding it, and so forth. I think also that the guidelines do specify things where, like they recognize that there's a huge range and a range of exceptions. And so it's kind of up to you as a designer to make good choices based on that. I think there's enough overlap, though, to make it valuable.
Cool. Okay, great question. Thanks for the answers, guys. I've got a couple more here. One from Neera. Are there any guidelines for cultural accessibility, as in what's acceptable and what's not? Where do we draw the line between what's accessible and what's also ethically acceptable?
Yeah,
that's a rabbit hole.
It is a real rabbit. These are fantastic questions, by the way. These are some deep, good questions. Yeah, I mean, that is a rabbit hole because which culture? I mean, there's it's the World Wide Web, right? And I don't know. Like I feel like, first of all, I'd probably refer you back again to the toolkit from Microsoft because they have a series of exercises. So we weren't able to share that, but they include very nice spectrum that includes things like cultural sensitivity. And so they will actually have a series of card exercises, I guess is the best way to call them, that is simply about discussion. And so to me, it's the fact that you're asking the question is, first of all, half the battle. Coming up with a framework to talk about those questions and make them acceptable to talk about in your group, in your organization, is a huge part of it. Besides that, I think that it's probably a combination of analytics, right? There's some of that too. Like, again, when you're thinking about which culture, how do we think about that? Well, maybe some of that is informed by the direct understanding of your users. I don't know, Andrew, rabbit hole for you.
Yeah, but it is fascinating. I think the answer to the most important question is, where do you draw the line? And it's I don't know, where can you afford to, and what's feasible? ideally, you don't want to be offending any of the people that you've got coming to the site. And I know that this does get into a bit of a debate about political correctness and so forth. I'm definitely I'm going to avoid that hornet's nest for sure. But I think that so there's an example I can share. I had an opportunity to spend some time at the Harley Davidson people. I don't really like their motorbikes, but they are a smart bunch of designers. And their global creative director shared some of his perspective on this, because they sell their motorcycle in parts of the world where showing a woman riding a motorcycle is an absolute offense. And you can just imagine how that flies in the face of what the marketing department, say, in the United States is thinking, or possibly Australia, in the marketing of a new motorcycle. And you want to show that everybody is invited to ride the motorcycle, and you can and you should. And so they have the ability, of course, to have site-specific microsites and entire websites, and they can target the language and the images and so forth. But I think part of it is, I don't think that there's a single answer that's going to serve every situation for your organization, and certainly not for every organization. But like Jeremy said, I think asking the question is the most important first step. And then I guess what's the cost of offending, and what's the cost of engaging? I think that when you put together content on the web, you're often not thinking about, like, is this going to be possibly offensive or uninviting to someone? And you can make yourself crazy. Like, you make an icon of food and there's a hamburger, and it's like, well, what if it's a vegetarian? Are they going to be upset about beef? And it's, well, maybe it's a veggie burger. I don't really know. The fact that we're having these conversations is good. You can make yourself a little bit nuts. And so
I do want to just so I mentioned earlier again, we'll provide links to these, but the resources I mentioned earlier can be found here on the Microsoft site, Inclusive Design. And specifically, I know that these inclusive activities do include some pieces on the cultural sensitivities and questions and ethical ones as well. So hopefully that helps you.
Great. Thank you. Now, we've actually got a couple of people in the audience who have added to your answers earlier about specifically designing for apps. David has said a good place to start is appsforall.com.au, which is a good place for start for mobile apps. And Tom has added, when designing and developing for native iOS, it can be really helpful to use the default colors and text styles, because then these are automatically adjusted when the user adjusts their settings. Whereas with custom settings for colors, it can be harder for things to adjust for example, high contrast mode or larger text sizes. So thank you for adding into those. Now, we do have another question, a slightly different tact, and you guys mentioned about lawsuits and hidden markets and business reasons and business loss reasons. But Katina has asked, how do we sell this to execs for a government intranet site when WCAG is only applied to external sites? Government policy, ?
Yeah, I think that those questions those arguments are going to be different. I think, obviously, in some ways, I don't know if it's radically different in the sense, sure, the fact that it's not consumer facing, I guess you could make the argument that, that rules don't apply here, but I think some of the discussions you can have really come down to, again, like just the biggest one, which is increasing the level of accessibility helps the experience for everyone. So internet sites, of course, are notorious for having some of the most god-awful information architecture, design, and complete inability to find anything, which is supposed to be their entire point. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I remember, again, one of my first jobs as a web designer in 1999 was like, hey, designer guy, go, design the internet. And I didn't really know what I was doing. So because it was my first job, and the web was just born. So, but I think that that's part of it. It's just I don't know. I don't think if there's going to be resistance to it, you have to appeal to the common humanity. Like design is supposed to make people's lives easier. These are your employees. These are your fellow colleagues. They're looking for information that might help them. Who knows what these days with COVID and so forth, it might help them, get better. It might help them find help. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why that argument could be made. But I don't know.
Jeremy, it's the government. They don't want to help anybody. I'm kidding. I think there is an important detail though, and that is that it really depends on where this is happening. And so different countries, different provinces and countries all have requirements and mandates that all digital properties have to be accessible, and their deadlines associated. So I think it really depends on where you are and what you're talking about. An intranet site is a government-owned, government-run web property that is making information available to people. And so if they're hiring people with different abilities, then they have to serve them. It's no different from saying like, well, we don't really need that ramp out front because, like there's a loading dock in the back for moving stuff in. And it's like, no, the ramp's, for another reason. But I think I know that in Australia, there's like a Ministry of Digital Transformation that has, that details, I mean, they've done a fantastic job of documenting what makes accessible websites and why. And I'm pretty sure that the mandate in Australia is that all government, maybe it's just for government, for public-facing web properties, that they have to be accessible to people with no technical knowledge, with limited English skills, with sort of like hokey bandwidth. If they're in faraway and rural places and they're using a subpar device. And these are the guidelines, whether there's actually like someone who's going to arrest people from breaking them, I don't know.
Cool. All right, thank you. Now, I am conscious of time and we are on this schedule, so I do not want to overstay our welcome. So Andrew and Jeremy, on behalf of all of us at AQuent, thank you to you both for, I guess, an enlightening, educational and entertaining talk, but also for staying up till, what is it now? It must be approaching midnight your time now to present for us. Really appreciate from us at AQuent, and I'm sure everybody else who's attended this. I'd like to also to give a big thanks to UX Australia for our ongoing partnership and for having DigiTalks on the schedule at this year's UX Australia event. And of course, to everybody for attending. We will be having another DigiTalks later this year. It will be a standalone DigiTalks. We'll keep you all posted on the dates and the topic. And look forward to seeing you all again then, if not before. But thank you again, Andrew. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, everybody, for attending. See you all again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.